Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Kevin Blekicki Show in junction with the Ryan Show. This is episode number 37. We have another great show for you this week. We're going to briefly mention the Jets winning their second game of the season, back-to-back wins. They now improved to 2-7. I'm not going to go fully into the game. If you want my full game recap, you can hit up my YouTube channel, Kevin Blekicki, where I posted a video on Monday. We're going to briefly talk on the Palmetto series between Clemson and South Carolina. The Gamecock women's basketball team is off to another great start, 3-0. They weren't super impressive in their game against Clemson, but they did play some really great defense. We're going to talk about the Pete Alonso saga. Of course, he opted out of his deal with the Mets this season, and he's going to be a free agent, and we will get into what the current news is on that situation. We're also going to get into this Emmanuel Clase fiasco. This is absolutely insane, and it's not even over a lot of money. So he just completely threw away his career for no reason. And we're going to get into the ESPN and YouTube TV drama. That's just a whole bunch of nonsense that I feel could be one of the unifying factors in this country amongst the American people. And then we'll lightly touch on the Brian Dable and Nico Harrison firings. But first, we do have to talk about my New York Jets getting the job done and getting their second win of the season. It was pretty ugly. Their 3 touchdowns came on a 99-yard kick return touchdown, a 74-yard punt return touchdown, and then a long screen pass to Breece Hall. That's all the touchdowns that they had. Will McDonald had a great game, got 4 sacks. Justin Fields, another horrendous game. I don't know why we keep throwing him out there. He's clearly not the answer. But I will say I am glad that the Jets won this game and that they've been winning the last couple of games, because nothing good happens from this team being so bad after firing Robert Saleh last year. You know, there's no two ways about it. The whole Robert Saleh, Aaron Rodgers era of Jets football was a complete disaster, and they got rid of everybody from last year. They're bringing in, a new coach in Aaron Glenn, and he's gotten off to a rocky start. He was there when they had a rocky start in Detroit, and now Detroit has ascended to levels that I've never seen in my lifetime. So maybe there is something there. Maybe Aaron Glenn knows something. Maybe things will start to turn around. But the Jets, in 5 of their 7 losses, have been in 1-score games. So as bad as this team is, they are playing a competitive brand of football, and they're playing pretty decently. They're not being able to finish, but you're seeing the last couple weeks that they're able to make the plays that they need to win games. And look, there's a parallel universe where the Jets have a lot more wins. Maybe they're up 4 or 5 wins. Maybe this team is hunting on a wild card spot. But as of right now, they traded away 2 of their top defensive players in Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams, and now it looks like they're going to rebuild. And now they have a bunch of draft picks in the next couple of years and a bunch of cap space to do whatever they want. So we'll see what happens with the Jets. I don't really have a whole lot of faith in that team, but we do move on to the Gamecock women's basketball team. They are number 2 in the country. They took on Clemson on Tuesday, and it was not a very impressive win for South Carolina. They left a lot to be desired, at least offensively. They really struggled, but you do have to give credit to Joyce Edwards. She had 18 points and 8 rebounds. Medina Okote, 12 points, 12 rebounds, her first double-double as a member of the Gamecocks. And this team is really not as deep as they were in years past. And that has a lot to do with Ashlyn Watkins being out for the full season again this year, pretty much back to back years being out. Chloe Kitts being out for the full season. And it didn't help that Maddie McDaniel was also out. She's injured. She's also got suspended for this game. So she would have been a nice little role player coming off the bench. But I am loving this starting five with Joyce Edwards, Medina Okote, Tessa Johnson, Tanaya Latson, and Raven Johnson. Raven Johnson's really been impressing me with her better shot selection. She only put up 2 points in this game, but she's been doing a lot better with her efficiency. And this is a team that I feel like if they're going to be going deep into not just the SEC tournament, but into March Madness, they're going to have to rely heavily on that starting five, which is not something that South Carolina is used to doing. They're used to relying on their bench, and that's what separates them from a lot of teams. So if they have to go up against a team like UConn or UCLA, are they going to have enough depth to withstand, those teams? Tessa Johnson's a great young player. She's playing over 30 minutes each game. She's used to maybe playing like 10 to 15, maybe 20. So she's usually a bench player, and so she's going to have to get used to starting and playing a whole lot more minutes and working on her conditioning, and she's been doing pretty good about that. South Carolina ended up beating Clemson in this game 65-37. I will never miss an opportunity to dunk on Clemson and, cheer on their failures, especially when South Carolina beats them. And we also held them to 2 points in the fourth quarter. The game was, you gotta give Clemson credit for most of the game. They held the game pretty close, but South Carolina was able to really run away in the fourth quarter, outscoring Clemson by a score of 20-2. The 2 points were the fewest amount of points that they've ever allowed in a single quarter in their program's history. So this is a great night, great win for South Carolina. And soon they'll be heading out to LA to face Southern California in the Battle of the Real SC, which we all know is South Carolina. We know that South Carolina is the real USC because despite Southern Cal going by that name, South Carolina was a college first, so it's ours. That's probably not going to be a popular opinion, but it is objectively the truth. And I want to close out this first segment of the show by talking about the Pete Alonso drama, because it is being reported that Pete Alonso might not be coming back to the Mets unless it is a team-friendly deal. And I think this is a terrible decision by the Mets. You need to bring back Pete Alonso for whatever you can. I'm not too worried about the money right now because we don't have a salary cap. And I don't know if there's going to be a salary cap. We have to wait and see with this new collective bargaining agreement and if they end up being having a salary cap after the lockout, if we have one, which seems to be the main reason why these two sides are feuding. But Pete Alonso has the most home runs in the history of this franchise. He's a homegrown player, and there will be a time in which Pete is going to have to compete, and there's going to be a struggle between him and Juan Soto. I know Pete Alonso is not the best defensive player, out there. Neither is Juan Soto. So there will be a time in a few years where Pete's getting older and Juan Soto's whatever defense he has now is going to start to decline. And there's going to be a conflict for that designated hitter spot. And you're not going to platoon Juan Soto. He almost had a 40-40 season this season. He's a guy who's He's a great hitter, can hit for a lot of power, drive in a lot of runs, and he's just not the type of player. You're paying him almost $800 million. You're not going to have him sit on the bench. It's bad enough that you're having him be a DH, but you're not going to bench him against lefties and then have Pete Alonso be your DH against left-handed pitching. Pete Alonso needs to be a part of this team, and I think that this team is significantly worse if Pete's not there. I think he's definitely one of the emotional leaders of the locker room and of the clubhouse. Um, Pete Alonso is just a fantastic player, and I want him back on this team no matter what. It's like I said, it's gonna come down to those years, and maybe you don't want to give him more than 4 or 5, but if it's like a 5-year deal, 200 million, that's fine with me. I mean, like I said, it's Steve Cohen's money, and right now we don't have a salary cap, so you can just run that baby up for as much money as you possibly can. And I don't know if they implement a salary cap, if it's going to be a hard cap, and if players are going to have to restructure their contracts. I don't know how that's going to end up working out, but this is a team that needs to win now, and I think that Pete Alonso definitely puts you in a position to win now. He's a guy that hits 30 home runs and drives in 100 RBIs pretty much on the regular basis. He doesn't really get injured all that often. So he's definitely going to be missed by this team if he ends up leaving. I don't want Pete Alonso to leave. This is what happens when it's November. We have to start talking about this. The MLB offseason can be a lot of fun, and it can be interesting. I love seeing the notifications that your team got a player. It's always a lot more fun, but when it's stressing you out like this, it can really put a number on you. I mean, I do not want to have to wait again until January to get this thing done. Like, I'm of the mind that I do want Pete Alonso back as a Met, but at the same time, we do have to wrap this thing up pretty quickly because you want to be able to sign other players, and you want to know what your future is going to be like. And you don't want to just wrap it up in one guy. As much as I think it would be a great idea to bring him back, don't budget your whole future on the returning of Pete Alonso. And it sucks that we're no longer going to have Antoine Richardson and Jeremy Hefner on this team, as they were both signed by the Atlanta Braves, because of course they were. Of course, Antoine Richardson was going to have the best base stealing that we've had in a long time and be a great first base coach, only for him to go to the Braves. But that's the world that we live in. So we're going to see what happens with the Mets so far. But that does it for the first part of the Kevin Blekicki Show. We will be back after these messages. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Kevin Blekicki Show. And unfortunately, we have to talk about the political and economic state of the world. I wish it wasn't that way. I'm not super into politics, but I have a general idea of what's going on. And there are situations in which sports and politics intertwine. And this is one of those times. And I'm not worried about any negative backlash, because nothing that I'm going to be saying is really that crazy or really that offensive or, quite frankly, really wrong. Everything I'm going to be saying is what everyone's feeling and what's actually happening in the world. So if you don't want that, then I guess this isn't the part of the show that you want to listen to. But YouTube TV and Disney/ESPN have been feuding, and the only people that are being affected by it are regular everyday people who have decided to get away from cable because it's too expensive, and they're cutting the cord, only for all of these different leagues to require all of these different subscriptions to watch their league. And now, YouTube TV has dropped ESPN, or I don't know if it's YouTube has taken off Disney or ESPN, or Disney and ESPN has removed their stuff. It doesn't matter, because the only people that get affected are the regular, everyday Americans. And the more that time moves on, whether people are afraid to, want to admit it or not, capitalism just doesn't work, and it's ruining sports. And I feel like everyone agrees with me, they just don't want to admit it. How many times have you been watching any sport event and they put on some sort of parlay, or they talk about gambling, or money lines or point spreads? It's completely unavoidable. Whether or not you are into gambling or you want to gamble, it is inevitable. These companies are going to try and get you addicted. They want to get your money, and they want you addicted to all these different apps. And it's sick, and it's disgusting. And we live in a country of haves and have-nots. You either have it or you don't. There really is no such thing as a middle class anymore. And the fact that these two companies are feuding is only hurting the American people. And I know that a lot of, the people who watch college football are right wing, but right now the right wing isn't doing so well. You know, we live in a world where millions of people are getting cut off from their EBT and their food stamps, and the government is shut down, so all the government employees are not getting paid except for frickin' ICE, who can do their illegal raids on people. And I know I work at an airport. All the airports are messed up because of air traffic controllers quitting because they're not getting paid, and TSA agents quitting because they're not getting paid. And it's an absolute nightmare. It really is. The country is not doing great at all. And we had President Trump go to the Commanders game on Sunday against the Lions, and he was booed viciously. He's not a popular person right now, and he knows it because everyone at that stadium booed him. And he was there to swear some people in to the military or whatever. I don't know why they were doing it at a football game, but he did it, and he was booed viciously the entire time. And then he went on to he went into the Fox broadcast booth, and he was there for about 10 minutes, and they didn't press him at all. And you got Jonathan Vilma, for some reason, trying to bait Trump into like the 6'7" meme. He was doing a terrible job. The only softball that he gave was like, "Hey, what's going on with the state of the country?" And then, of course, you knew that Trump was just gonna lay a bunch of BS out there, because it's Fox. Fox is conservative. They're not gonna be really pushing Trump in any hard direction. They're just gonna give him softballs, have him do his 10 minutes, talk about football or whatever, and then just move on. They, of course, weren't going to talk about the government shutdown. They weren't going to talk about the Epstein files. They weren't going to talk about, the people getting kicked off EBT and food stamps and the SNAP benefits. None of that was going to happen. But, I mean, Jesus, like, I was expecting at least something, and I was completely let down by Kenny Albert and Jonathan Vilma, especially since Jonathan Vilma is a former Jet, and they just completely glazed him for 10 minutes, and it was absolutely disgusting. And if you were just someone who's watching that game and you, like, completely do not watch any sort of news or you are completely oblivious, you would have thought that the state of the country was fine and that, he's just a regular old president. We're all doing okay. And that's just not the reality. The reality is that the majority of people are living paycheck to paycheck. And now a lot of them don't know where the next meal is going to come from. They're going to, have to pay out the ass for all of their health insurance. And just Trump is just up there just saying, "Oh, everything's great, nothing's going wrong," because of course he's a serial pathological liar. He's never going to admit fault, even when every single candidate that he endorsed in the recent elections all lost. If I was up there, I would have been like, "Hey, Mr. President, every single candidate that you endorsed personally lost. What does that say about how the American people view you as a president?" Or maybe, "Hey, Zohran Mamdani just won the mayoral election in New York, and he ran on affordability. That was something that you ran on. So if he's running on it, doesn't mean that you're not doing your job and you're not making it affordable." Those are just a couple of questions that I would have asked. But, they didn't ask me for my opinion, so I guess my opinion on that doesn't matter. I'm just a regular person who's trying to make it in the sports media world and is doing the best that I can to just take it day by day. But I do want to go back to the gambling, because if you remember, during the NBA Finals, Stephen A. Smith got caught playing solitaire during the NBA Finals. It wasn't during a break. It was literally in the middle of the game. And just recently, him and a bunch of ESPN personnel came out and endorsed a solitaire app that is, it's a gambling app, and it's in a lot of trouble for rigging its games against its customers. And Stephen A. Smith is such an interesting character to me because I remember his entire career. I've been conscious for his entire career. I remember when ESPN had a morning show called Cold Pizza, and he had a segment with Skip Bayless called First and 10. They just had a little bit of debates here and there, and then it slowly grew into First Take, and then it grew into this massive thing. And now Stephen A. Smith is getting paid more than a lot of athletes are. And he's just become this bigger than life personality, and everything that ESPN does is either related to Stephen A. Smith or Pat McAfee. And they've completely gone away with the Sports Center talent, or, the actual journalists that made ESPN so great. And for him to do such a shameless ad, and the ad itself was horrendous. It was using AI, and look, I'll be the first to admit that I do use ChatGPT sometimes. I use it for my my logo, and I use it for my thumbnails and stuff. But I try not to use it if I don't have to. I don't have the Photoshop skills or whatever to do that, so I do use ChatGPT. But I'm not out here literally doing AI ads. Like, Stephen A. is in the middle of an ad with someone who's obviously computer generated. Like, they couldn't hire an actor for a day to just spew out some lines. They had to digitally create a person. I mean, come on. And of all the ESPN personalities that got caught up in it, it was like Stephen A., it was Dan Orlovsky, Laura Rutledge, Kendrick Perkins. The one that hurt the most was Mina Kimes, because Mina Kimes is a respected and really, talented journalist and sports personality, and she knows ball, and she's amazing at what she does. And for her to get caught up in this scenario is just absolutely heartbreaking for me. So ESPN, they're promoting this solitaire app. They're getting rid of ESPN Bet because that folded, because nobody wanted all of that betting content shoved down their throat. And now they're removing all of their content from YouTube TV. They're pushing that ESPN streaming service, and I like ESPN Plus. I'm not gonna lie, it's great for college sports. It has all the NHL games on it. It has the 30 for 30 documentaries, which I find fascinating. ESPN Plus is a really good product. And when it comes down to Disney or other, you know, giant companies, I'm going to take the side of Disney because not that I'm a fan of these corporations, but Disney is just in a chokehold. Like they own ESPN. If you like college football, you can't watch a Saturday of college football without ESPN. You have the big noon game on Fox. You have like Notre Dame on NBC. You have the Big Ten games at the end of the night on NBC as well. You have the Big Ten on CBS. But other than that, SEC, ACC, all of that, like a good chunk of the games are on ESPN family of networks. And when they're not there, you can't watch it. That's where all of the college football playoff games are going to be. They're going to be on the ESPN family of networks. If you don't have ESPN, you can't watch it. So this just screws over the regular person so much. And, that's one of the reasons why I'm hopeful for Mom Donnie, and not just the future of NYC, but for other races out there. We need to primary these old ass Democrats that are going to sell you out. The 8 Democrats that just, we're trying to hold the line and get the Republicans to expand the Affordable Care Act, and they just immediately folded. I'm so tired of these old ass people who are beholden to their donors. And I don't care what your affiliation is politically. I'm not going to lie. That's a lie. I do. But we all deserve to have a representative government that is of the people, by the people, and for the people. And in my 30 years of life, I've never had that before. So hopefully things can change. But I will close on this Emmanuel Clase situation. He was a closer for the Cleveland Guardians, and he was an all-star. He was an amazing pitcher, and him and Luis Ortiz got into a gambling scandal where they would purposely throw balls, and a bunch of people would bet on it, and they'd make money. And the crazy thing about this is that the money that was won from those bets doesn't even come close to the contract that these guys are making. These guys could have just lived off of their professional contracts and been fine. But one of two things happened. Either these guys are very sick and they decided to, they just couldn't get out of their own way, and they were just addicted to the rush and they're actual gambling addicts, or some very powerful people in some suits told them, hey, you're going to do this or else we're going to hurt people that you love. And I'm not accusing them of being tied to the mafia, because that's what Chauncey Billups is for. But I mean, it just makes you think. Like these guys, like Emmanuel Clase and Luis Ortiz could face up to 65 years in prison if convicted on all charges. Was it really worth that? I mean, especially for Emmanuel Clase, he was one of the best closers in baseball, and he could spend the rest of his life in prison because he threw a ball and a bunch of people made money off of it. It makes no sense. But the one topic that I do want to close on is Brian Daboll and Nico Harrison both got fired. Brian Daboll, the Giants coach, Nico Harrison, the GM for the Mavericks, who traded away their best player in franchise history. I mean, along with Dirk Nowitzki, but I think Luke is better. But they both ended up paying the price. Brian Daboll had a lot of success as Josh Allen's offensive coordinator, becomes the Giants head coach. Of course, they get rid of him. They don't fire Joe Shane, so now Joe Shane gets to pick the new head coach. I don't think that's a particularly smart move, but that's not my decision to make. And Nico Harrison trades away Luka Doncic. They get Cooper Flag #1 overall, and now they're starting to struggle. And Nico Harrison basically is the fall guy when really it was the organization who told him to make the move, and he ended up paying the price for it. It sucks, but that's the world we live in. That does it for this edition of the Kevin Blekicki Show. We thank you for listening. Hopefully it wasn't too political for you. You can follow me on social media on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram at Kevin Blekicki. You can follow me on YouTube at Kevin Blekicki as well. And we'll see you next week.